We're in the midst of a huge transformation where our peers, communities, and workplaces are all really melding into one. Welcome to Reimagining Company Culture. My name is Christina Giordano, she, her, and hers, and I am the Senior Partnerships Manager here at AllVoices. Today, I am super excited to welcome our next guest onto the interview series, Nick Alm. They're the goddess of the House of Mossier. Nick, thank you so much for being here. If you want to share a little bit about yourself for our listeners, including your pronouns and when you were younger, do you remember how exactly you answered the question, what do you want to be when you grow up?
Oh my gosh. Well, thank you, Christina, so much for having me. I am Nick Alm. My pronouns are they, them. Gosh, when I was really young, I always kind of wanted to be a singer. I can't sing at all, though. I was in orchestra. I played the violin. I loved being on stage. I loved fashion. So it was going to be some sort of like Liberace character that I just wanted to like play in real life. And so movie star, yeah, all the things in those veins. That was kind of what I was always aiming for.
All of the things. We love to see it. I used to sing very loudly to my hit clips of Britney Spears.
So, don't get me started.
Not a singer either, but that was definitely something I aspired to be as well. Fast forward to today, how has your personal journey, how has really led you to Mossier?
Yeah. Well, for starters, I was the queer kid who would walk into a department store and see a men's section and see a women's section and think, where do people like me go to shop? And, where do people like me play sports? Why is all of this stuff divided into these very rigid binary gender norms? And I was one of two openly queer people in my class of 700 in high school in Stillwater, Minnesota. I went to business school, if you can believe it. So I was the type of queer person who, because of being bullied, because of the trauma, I leaned into being a high achiever, get good grades, get into great school, pursue a high-powered career trajectory. I thought I was going to be an investment banker and all these things. And that really all came crashing down in college, really. And when I just realized, I'm like, this is so inauthentic to who I am. My mom checked into rehab for addiction issues, and a lot of life things happened where I just kind of crashed and burned it away and got to like build myself back up from that. Started the first LGBTQ student organization at the business school I went to. And then we had 150 people show up to our very first dinner. And I was like, oh my gosh, there were 5 of us who started the group.
Yeah.
And they, we were just like, hey, y'all, we just want to be openly queer and not feel like it's going to ruin our earning potential or our ability to move up in the world. And we had all those people come forward. And I thought, oh, wow, this is a much bigger issue than just me. I really thought I was isolated. These companies started to come forward and said, Nick, can you help us develop our transgender inclusion guidelines? Can you help us? Our recruiting teams, they don't know how to talk to LGBTQ people. Our employee resource group, we're trying to get that off the ground. And so little by little, all these little business light bulbs kind of happened. And that became the foundation for saying, oh, I want to start my own business. I want to work on this issue full time. And I think it might be possible to have some level of success here. So that was how Mossier got off the ground.
Incredible. Thank you for sharing your story and journey to this work. I feel like I've been seeing a lot of really organizations trying to answer the question for themselves. How do we really engage with and empower LGBTQIA plus queer employees and candidates as well? I have a lot of questions for you about your experience and just insights, advice for our listeners, but starting out with a more foundational and broad question of what do you think the role of private and public employers is to create more equity in the world?
Yeah, well, I'm a big proponent of what I would call the business as a force for good movement. And traditionally, we've relied on the government alone to solve every civil rights challenge, every single pressing social issue. And businesses, I think, are finally starting to realize that they're not operating in a vacuum, that what happens to queer people, what happens to Black people, what happens to women in the public sphere, in our social and political worlds. It impacts how we show up at work. It impacts how we succeed at work. We can't have a business if the planet is underwater or on fire. So there's been this massive, come to Jesus moment, that even predated what I would say the George Floyd murder. People think, oh, this was kind of a new movement in the last 3 years. It was definitely going on before that. It's gained a lot of momentum now. And so you see companies doing what I am advocating for, which is, more triple bottom line thinking. Yes, you have to make profit. Absolutely. Bills got to be paid. Light bills have to be paid. Employees have to be paid. But what about the health and well-being of your stakeholders, i.e. your customers, i.e. your workers? The environment, the planet is one of those other lines on your balance sheet. And the responsibility, it's more than a responsibility at this point. It's a moral, economic imperative as more and more businesses realize that if we don't solve some of these social and environmental issues, it doesn't matter what the stock market says or what Wall Street says. So
I definitely agree with you around the triple bottom line, and it doesn't have to be mutually exclusive to make a profit, pay the bills, pay your employees, but also do more good in the world. And it's something that people are expecting as well from their role of employers. It's a responsibility to stakeholders. Mossier really focuses on jobs and working with queer leaders and allies across all rungs of the ladder to make workplaces really work for everyone, and thinking about redesigning and iterating on more equitable processes, knowing that queer folks and the LGBTQIA plus community is not one monolith like any other community. What is something that you wish all employers really adopted to be truly queer inclusive workplaces?
Yeah, it's such a great question. And you prefaced it with what I tell the companies right up front is that the experience of gay white men at your organization is not going to be the same as the experience of Black lesbian women or disabled trans Hispanic folks. Like intersectionality, if you're going to do queer rights correctly, if you're going to make a queer inclusive organization or an LGBTQ inclusive organization, I'm using those interchangeably, which we can talk about. I understand that some folks like queer and some folks may not. But intersectionality has to be at the forefront, because most of the time we design solutions around people who have the most privilege within the LGBTQ community. Most of our LGBTQ conversations, we're not talking to the employee resource group for Black employees. If anything, we're seeing these different communities as fighting with each other, competing with each other for a smaller and smaller pie of diversity, equity, and inclusion, dollars, resources, capacities. We feel a lot of companies are struggling with, okay, it's Black History Month, now it's Pride Month, now it's National Coming Out Month, and just even keeping track and keeping up with all of those different opportunities and advocacy opportunities. So intersectionality has to be at the forefront, designing solutions for the most marginalized within our community. That has to be a grounded focus. And then at Mossier, we have 5 core areas that we work on with companies. So LGBT employee resource groups, gotta have it. And they have to be sustainable. They have to be supported by executive leadership. It has to go beyond where most companies are at right now, which is they have an employee resource group that is just driven on the backs of some really talented, passionate, openly LGBTQ employees, but they burn out after a year, after 2 years. And these groups have these very tough kind of boom and bust cycles that they go through. You have to have great healthcare for trans folks specifically. You have to have transgender inclusion guidelines. Tell employees, this is how you transition at work. This is the role of a team member. This is the role of a people leader. If somebody is going through any sort of gender transition, we work on self-ID with companies. Here's a little thing. Most organizations have no idea how many LGBTQ people work for them. So if you want to do this work right, you're going to have to get that data at some point. you're also going to have to think through, is it appropriate for us to ask those questions right now? Or will it come off as kind of a witch hunt? Do we need to get that ERG, get our benefits and our policies set up more so that people feel like they even want to check a box? And then lastly, we look at culture, which includes, thinking through like psychological safety, allyship. How do you make LGBTQ inclusion part of the subconscious DNA of your company? And then recruiting is the last one. You have to have a strong focus on recruiting. You have to have recruiters who know and see our community and can be comfortable sharing a room, an interview room with a queer person. I started this business because I asked employers, I said, what is it like to be LGBTQ at your company? And this is a big reason why I started my own company, is because I got all of these awkward moments, deer in the headlights stares from recruiters. And they weren't bad people. They were good people who just were not exposed to our community and this conversation. So self-ID, trans and non-binary, employee resource groups, recruiting, and culture. Those are the 5 areas that you want to think hard about if you're going to start this journey.
Absolutely. I appreciate how holistic the 5 pillars and areas are as well, because we're not looking to check a box here and say, okay, we have one employee resource group and that's all we are going to do, and we're not going to pay people or give budget. You really have to invest and make the long-term authentic commitment in creating really inclusive organizations of queer LGBTQ plus folks. There is a lot of work to be done. And like I just said, you've never achieved that North Star, and you're not going to work on it in 2024 or 2025. Are there any employers you see as really making, that intentional progress around fostering specifically trans or non-binary inclusive workplaces as well?
Yeah, you see good things happening, here and there. I was just on a call with a company you'd be a little shocked about, based in Minnesota here, Anderson Windows and Doors, a manufacturing company. And they rolled out some of the most comprehensive, detailed transgender inclusion guidelines I've ever seen. And we got to have a launch for those that were sponsored by the Chief Diversity Officer. Really, really detailed in the sense that they gave very clear instructions, practical, tactical instructions, which I know we'll talk about, for how you as a team member, as a people leader, you support somebody who's trans. Scenario planning. Okay, what do we do if somebody has an issue with this trans individual wanting to use a bathroom that aligns with their gender identity? Giving people those really kind of important kind of checklists. You see companies doing great things around, giving trans folks directories, provider directories. It's not good enough anymore to just say, here's our health plan, and there are no exclusions for transgender care. Good companies now are saying, here is a list of providers in our area that we have certified as LGBTQ competent. These are people who are covered by the insurance. We have states right now that are trying to ban providers from giving that care. So companies here and there, they're watching those trends. They're watching how, again, the policy environment and the political environment is making life harder for trans people, and they're providing travel stipends if you need to go across state lines to get care, things like that. Pronoun normalization has really become a huge conversation. I think pronouns are just the tip of the iceberg. A lot of folks are putting them in their email signatures, and that's a really great step. But the best organizations are training their employees to say, okay, why do pronouns matter? Why does me as a non-binary person who uses they, them pronouns, why is it detrimental to my mental well-being? Why is it discriminatory to not use somebody's correct pronouns? Companies that are going above and beyond, they're giving employees the access to those learning opportunities that actually can expand their allyship versus, check the box, put your pronouns in your email signature and call it a day. We'll leave it at that. So it's there. But to answer your question directly, there are very few companies that I would say are really doing this well. it's just a unfortunate reality of kind of this day and age. Yeah.
It sounds like to really make the intentional effort to do well, you need to be really prepared and seek out that education and not go through the motions as well, and really prepare for conversations, kind of think about the scenarios as you were talking about too, and also for decision makers, folks in people or leadership roles, create those policies and frameworks for people to really get the resources that they need. I really appreciate that healthcare example too, folks that are covered by insurance and also have demonstrated that they are queer competent is important. You mentioned the practical and tangible or tactical, and I saw on Mosher's website one of the phrases around strategies that lack practicality are for the birds. So wanna get into that and ask, like, what does a strategy that lacks practicality look like, and what does one look like when it does have those two things?
Yes. So we're in this really cool crossover moment, and that has occurred in the last 2-3 years, where I'm calling it the transition from DEI, diversity, equity, inclusion 1.0 to 2.0. 1.0 was statements, good intentions, DEI strategies that were vague, such as, love is love. We want everyone to be their full self at work. Our strategy is to ensure that every person from an underrepresented background feels included. Statements that feel really good and that, of course, make a ton of sense. But ultimately, what the question becomes, what is my role in helping to execute on that strategy? Take the, bring your authentic self to work message. That has been debunked, in my opinion, because so many LGBTQ people, especially, as we have said, all right, I will come out at work. I will put the onus on our community to come out and help lead change. It has made us brighter targets for discrimination, brighter targets for harassment, and brighter targets for our companies to tokenize us and kind of use us as a way to say, okay, look, we have this outpopulation. We must be doing something right. No, we just have taken on the full burden of just pushing through these barriers that you should have removed. That isn't a sign of progress. And so we see strategies today that get more practical in the sense of, all right, these are the specific ways we're going to measure if an LGBTQ person is being recruited, is being retained, and if their engagement score survey, whatever type of engagement or psychological safety surveys your organization is doing, this is how we're going to get those scores up to a comparable level. These are the learning objectives people leaders need to have, right? You need to know the difference between non-binary and trans and what the LGBTQ acronym stands for. Like, companies getting that granular, because I don't think many allies, we think I know somebody who's LGBTQ, or I don't actively hate the LGBTQ community, so I'm an ally, so I'm prepared to lead this work. And that's a disservice to them, because we're putting them in people leader situations where they don't have the skills, they don't have the competencies to lead discussions with their teams or with individual people. So strategies that give those people leaders, here's what you're doing, here's how we're measuring it. Strategies that don't tie those things to compensation, to performance reviews. We need to see more of that. Strategies that tell employees that, one, give employees the space to go learn the skills that they need to execute on those strategies, to go to a training on trans inclusive allyship or pronouns, or whatever is most relevant to their specific piece. And then ultimately, a good strategy has accountability attached to it, which I kind of referenced, but who is going to be responsible if the numbers aren't what they're supposed to be? If the goals don't happen, is it the CEO? Is it the chief diversity officer? Is it the employee resource group? Is it who is owning that? And I don't want to say it's not a punishment, but what is the what is the outcome? How do we pivot if we find that we're not making progress? Because strategies, it's not an accident that they were non-specific and they were set in this very non-practical way. It basically allowed companies to just go years by saying, yeah, we're doing, we're creating workplaces that are great for Black people, and with nothing for us to grab onto and say, yeah, well, tell us how, tell us when, tell us with what dollars and on whose time. So
absolutely, that accountability piece is so crucial, and really mapping to business outcomes, mapping to results, leaders. What is my goal here? We talk a lot about bringing your ex self to work. Nobody is entitled to your authentic self at work. If you haven't created as leaders psychological safety and trust, why would I want to share anything about myself outside of my job as well? So really looking at that in an intentional way is so important. In your experience as a workplace trainer and educator on LGBTQ queer issues, are there any patterns or major changes, whether it's positive, negative, anything in between, you've seen to the discourse of questions asked or how folks engage, especially over the past few years since the pandemic has started?
Yeah, I think, it's not the popular thing to be optimistic or to say good things about the direction we're going in, I feel like.
Yeah.
Right. But here's the good news. Pandora's box has been opened, in a sense that 3 years ago, I wasn't sure if I was going to have a job, let's put it that way, when the pandemic hit, right? We were losing commitments, companies were backing out of sponsorship opportunities and trainings and things like that. Now Pandora's box is open in the sense that most organizations, they realize we got to do something. It's a non-negotiable. Now, what is that something? Remains to be seen. But it's now we've crossed that point where people, I would say a lot fewer people, see diversity, equity, inclusion, and LGBTQ specifically as an elective or as a nice to have thing. We get a lot of issues. There are great questions. People are saying, well, what do we do outside of June, outside of Pride Month? Like, why is the conversation always housed like those 30 days? I'm like, yes, keep asking that, please. That's a really good question. Why is it housed only during 1 month of the year? People are asking great questions around, how do we think in a non-binary way in general about all DEI topics, right? It's so hard to pin down, as we said in the beginning, the community is so broad, it's so hard to pin down one common thread or common lived experience. People are really realizing this is very nuanced work, and that intersectionality, even if they're not using the term intersectionality, they're starting to go, oh, like people do have different experiences, and I'm hearing that in my trainings. In my trainings, I get a lot of questions of like, how do I talk about this to my kids? I've gotten that question a lot recently. I was like, oh, I was not prepared for that.
I love that question.
Yeah. I was like, oh, so you're talking to your kids about this. You're thinking about talking to your kids about this. That's amazing. And so those things, and I would say just a general, a curiosity has been sparked. I did 17 talks this June.
Wow.
Last year I did like 7 or 8, so just personally have seen just a huge uptake and just overall interest, which has been great.
That is really great. And I think a lot of kind of positive curiosity based questions as well. And we know that this work is long, it's hard, it's never finished. And I'm sure you have many of these, but what is one of your proudest moments and why?
Well, as I was thinking about the question, I thought right away that my proudest moment is just to exist. My proudest moment is that my business exists.
Yeah.
Like I'm coming up on 5 years. I never would have thought this is what I would have been doing. I did not think I lived in a world that would support me being able to do the work that I do. And there are so many days where it just feels like we're not moving forward, and it feels like the progress is so slow. And I just kind of have to come back to like, no, I built this company. I built this company that's employing 7 people. I talked to 1,000 people this past June. We have held events. I need to do the math, where, thousands of people have come through our trainings and events and things. And did I positively impact everybody? Probably not, but I think most people did. I think most people got something out of it. And only time will tell, we're certainly moving in the wrong direction as a country on this issue. But I'm proud to say that, just even looking back after 5 years, like I did the best I could. I did something. I did my part on this issue, and it might not be enough. I know me alone can't solve every issue, but I was here, and I really tried my best to help. So that's what I'm proud of.
You are here, you're making a positive impact, you are sharing your story, you are really helping to educate others as well. So I think that is a really great answer. Nick, is there anything that I didn't specifically ask that you would like to share or underscore anything that we have discussed? I want to kind of open the mic back up to you.
Yeah. You really nailed it with the questions. No, nothing more from me. If you want to learn more about Mossier, Mossier.com, you can do that. We'd love to get you involved. We try to make most of our programming free or mostly free or accessible. Lots of great resources. If you're feeling like I'm ready to start my allyship journey, today is the best day to do it.
Today is the best day to do it. It is never too late. We will also link Mossier website in the show notes. Nick, thank you so much for holding space with me today, and I appreciated our conversation.
Thanks so much, Christina.
Of course, and as a reminder for folks who are listening, at AllVoices, we really believe in employees and employers being seen, heard, and understood, and know it's a requirement for the business to really succeed overall. Have a great rest of your day, everyone.